Hello and welcome to this installment of Breaking Barriers. We're with the fantastic Emily Barclay, who I will introduce in one moment. But in case you've no idea who I am, who is this woman talking at you from LinkedIn or Facebook, I am Sinead Sharkey-Steenson. I'm a leadership coach who loves to work with women to help them navigate their careers and leadership. And I have a particular fascination with perimenopause because I realized that's what I was helping a lot of women with, and realized that when I went through it myself. And so a big mission of mine has become to stop women leaving the workplace because of perimenopause. I mean, leaving altogether. I don't. I, you're okay to leave a crap job, but don't abandon your whole career. That's my ethos. Um, Before we get into the interview, I'm going to do a quick plug of a webinar I'm running next Wednesday, which will help you if you are feeling like you're going to leave. It's all about the leadership habits that are going to help you thrive and not hammer you over the head like that. Is it 75 hard or I don't know, those kind of crazy like morning routines and big habits that people sell. And it's not that. It's about what are the key things you can do and how to build them into your life so that you can actually make them happen. And this is coming from Mrs. ADHD, who has spent a lifetime struggling with habits. So if I can do them, anyone can. So I'll post the link for that. It's free, and I really want to help you have more success, thrive in 2025. So that's what that's all about. But now I'd love to welcome the magnificent Emily Barclay, who I'm not really going to read your bio. I'm going to tell you all how I came across Emily. So I was going through perimenopause hell, which anybody that's followed me for a while will know lots about, or if you've watched my TED talk. And a long time I didn't know what was happening. Once I worked out, thanks to the lovely Davina McCall, what was going on. I did what I always do. I looked for every resource I could to find answers, and thankfully I stumbled across the Perimenopause Hub and the Facebook group, which were my absolute lifesavers. And so I sniffed Emily out as the founder of that, and said, right, everybody needs to know your story. Everybody needs to know this exists. 100 and something, 30,000 women already do and are in it. And honestly, it saved my life. But I know you're going to share lots of your story with us. So welcome, Emily, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. That was quite the intro. I don't know how to follow that up now.
That's what intros are for. So, well, we'll start with Emily. Like I always ask everybody, stories are infinitely interesting, and people's career stories particularly are interesting, and I know yours is. So why don't you give us a bit of a whistle stop tour through where you started and how you ended up founding is it the biggest perimenopause resource?
Biggest perimenopause one. There's a menopause one that's bigger.
Right. Okay.
But I'm watching, and we're kind of catching up.
So from how did you get there? Let's hear the story.
Okay, whistle stop tour. So I will just very quickly, because I think it's relevant to sort of start at the beginning. So I studied French at university, and I remember when I finished university having that thing of going, now what do I do? Great, I've got a degree, fab. And my dad very kindly said, oh, I know this guy who's a careers coach. I'll send you to him. Okay, brilliant. So off I trot. And we had to do various exercises. And one of the exercises was, where do he was doing NLP or whatever. I don't know. I don't remember. It was quite a long time ago. I've slept since then. And he asked me to picture myself at 25, in my 40s and in my 60s. 25, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's not too far off. I can picture that. 60s kind of general retirement idea I had. I mean, not that our generation's going to retire in our 60s, but it was a lovely thought when I was in my 20s. And 60s bit I found quite easy. 40s, I absolutely drew a blank. Nothing. So if I trusted, I went and got a job at a radio station, then in a market research company, then in a wine company, then I went and did ski seasons, then I ran my own wine company, then I worked in the NHS for a while, and alongside having a dog walking business, which I still have. And then I left the NHS because I'd got a job at a charity, and it sounded like it was going to be a really nice next step. And perimenopause started at that time, and I was utterly useless. I lasted 6 months in the job before they had a probation review and went, kind of not working. And it was heartbreaking at the time. Obviously, these things are, but with hindsight, it was the best thing ever because the job was immensely stressful. It wasn't. My stress response, had completely changed. I didn't know it was perimenopause. I didn't know any of that. That happened just before I turned 40. And I remember putting something on Facebook saying, well, what do I do when I'm a grown up? And it's so interesting that it tied in with that, seeing that career coach back in my early 20s, that I got to nearly 40 and still had and it wasn't that 20-something-year-old me couldn't picture it. Nearly 40-something me couldn't picture it at all. Excuse me, I've got this lovely cough that's been going around. Anyway, so I went and saw a friend who is a life coach, and she had said on this Facebook post, she said, we need to work out your core values. Okay. In for a penny, in for a pound, cool. So we did that. And my core values, it turned out, were, among other things, helping women feel better. There were a few others around it, and so I came away thinking, right, okay, well, I guess fitness is quite a good way to help people feel better, because by that point I'd been training for Ironman triathlons and stuff, but I'm not that naturally fitnessy person, so that was a bit of a big leap for me, but I realized that it opened up whole new doors and stuff for me. So I thought, well, guess I'll become a PT then. Seems the sensible thing to do, so I did that. And I enjoy that, but it's not everything. And still at this point, all these weird symptoms are happening. Still don't know what's going on in my body. So that had been 2016, got qualified by the end of 2016. Finally, in 2019, with the doctor, we agreed that all this stuff that was going on was perimenopause. And I'm like, okay. Again, early 20-something me didn't know perimenopause existed. Indeed, early 40-something me didn't know perimenopause existed. So again, made sense why I drew a blank on what that would look like. So came home from the doctor and thought, right, well, I just need to find some resources to help me find a route through perimenopause. Couldn't find anything. Couldn't find what I needed. What I wanted was peer support, but also expert advice. And I couldn't find that in one place. So I figured I better sort of create it. So I started with a few experts that I knew in England. So some nutritionists, some mindset people, a doctor. Then found a flurry of experts in Canada, then Australia and New Zealand, then the US, and kind of went, okay, interesting. And alongside, I was setting up the website as well. And my go-to when thinking I might launch a business, because I'm a kind of a serial launcher of businesses, is to go on to 123reg and see if the domain name that I want is available, because I tend to take that as a sign that it's meant to happen. And if the domain name's not there, I'm like, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. Anyway, I knew I wanted to call it Perimenopause Hub. Perimenopausehub.com was like a quid. I'm like, well, guess that's meant to happen then. Better make it a thing. So that was how the hub started, literally like that.
I'm going to break. I just want to say, on behalf of all 130,000 of us, thank goodness that domain name was available, because I don't know what we'd all be doing right now. But please carry on.
But I genuinely thought I say business plan. I'm one of those people that I'm not very good at business plans, but my plan was that it would be, the website would be the main focus, and that would be where people would come together and find the experts, and we would support people in that capacity. And I set up the Facebook group because I didn't know how to put a forum onto the website, but I knew there needed to be that kind of peer support aspect. I thought that the hub in general would help a couple of thousand women. Yeah. I'm 65 times out on that so far. So it's grown beyond my imagination. It's the first role I've had where I can see that it always has scope for change and to adapt and to keep me interested, because I will hold my hands up. I mean, as my whistle stop tour of my working life has told you, I didn't mention brown bears in my whistle stop tour.
I know. I wasn't going to
we'll get onto that later. Yeah. But it's the first. I mean, my dog walking business, I adore. I love walking dogs. When as a kid, I wanted to run a boarding kennels. I don't like boarding kennels these days. Dog walking absolutely ticks that box for me. But the hub is the thing that just keeps my brain working, keeps me focused. We did a book about a year and a half ago. We are going to start doing a podcast quite soon. I'd love to have a festival. Like there's so much scope for it to become huge in every way that my imagination can come up with.
I love that. And I forgot to mention that I've since joined as an expert.
Yeah, you are indeed one of my experts.
Yeah, so love it. We will mention the brown bears in a minute. Stay tuned for brown bear talk. One of the things that really stands out to me there is what I hear from so many women, and what happened to me is the signs show up at work before you know what's going on. So, like you said, your stress response, forgetting things, anxiety over travel and just driving to work, driving at night, those things that kind of get in the way of you being able to do your job. Suddenly you can't hold the meetings that you used to be able to do without thinking about it. And I think that's one of the things, because none of us knew this word perimenopause. We were all expecting something around our 50s.
Right. I thought I didn't know perimenopause existed. I thought menopause was a few hot flushes and then your periods end.
And a bit of grumpiness I didn't know about.
Didn't even get that. Didn't even expect that.
Okay.
And, my mum, fair play to her, she says, yeah, I just had a few hot flushes and then my periods ended. And I'm like, right, okay. And I genuinely don't remember her. Like, some people go, yeah, I know, I remember my mum being really quite angry. My mum is like, she's one of the least angry people in the world, and I don't remember there ever being. Obviously, there was my teenage rage in the house, which was fun, but she never even rose to that. Wow. I think she deserves a medal.
Yeah. I've seen, yeah, I don't know, but I
I
suspect
mean, she does.
all mums do. All mums
She
deserve
does.
them.
She does.
And so that's the thing. And like I read with interest the stats about women leaving work due to perimenopause and menopause. I don't think we've any clue because most women don't know that that's why they've left.
Right. And I don't think those are true stats at all.
No.
I think a lot of women are leaving because they feel overwhelmed, or because they feel like they can't deal with the stress, or because their parents are needing them to care for them and stuff, which is all the other stuff that happens at the same time. And I think an awful lot of women aren't attributing their leaving the workplace to their hormonal changes. I think they're finding other things to pin it on.
Yeah, because as you've said, like it, we can talk about. We'll come to some of the things that we need to know about perimenopause in a few minutes. But like you've said, like it's that stress sandwich time, isn't it, where you've got everything going on, and whether you have kids or you don't, but if you do, they're likely reaching a trickier time, shall we
Yeah,
say. Older parents, more responsibility at work. We're always on. Like I feel
absolutely. But
like
also, one thing, this is a theory I have. I like to come up with a
I love
theory
a
with
theory.
no backing up at all. Here's one. Now, I have observed, obviously, I run a group with nearly 130,000 perimenopausal women, so there's quite a lot of observation going on here. A huge number of us reach a point where we have no more shits to give.
Yeah,
And when you put that in the context of, oh, why are women leaving the workplace? Maybe they're just fed up with all the crap that goes on. Maybe actually, and I'm going off slightly into a utopia here, so just go with me momentarily. But maybe if the workplace was more fluid, was less rigid and very masculine in the way it's set up, maybe women would stay, because actually they wouldn't be butting up against this stuff that just doesn't work for them any longer. And I'm not starting to specifically pin it on perimenopause and symptoms and stuff, but I think it's just that we reach a point, and our hormones obviously are a part of this. And I think in the past it would be called a midlife crisis. But when you just go, I don't need to kowtow to that anymore.
yeah. And I do agree with a lot of that. I think it's a perfect storm
Yeah.
because it is for most people the most stressful point of their lives to date. And we know that hormones and stress, like, so the hormones can trigger the stress, but stress makes the symptoms
A
way, way,
million
way,
times
way
worse.
worse.
Yeah.
And so the capacity to handle and manage all of that goes out the window, and something has to give. And I do agree that we go, well, I'm just not putting up with this shit anymore. And sometimes it's marriages, sometimes it's work. Um, and I totally agree. If workplaces were much better in supporting people in general, and women within that, then we may get a lot less, uh, you know, a lot less of an
Absolutely.
outflux.
And I
Yeah.
think obviously there are certain jobs where you can't have the leniency that I would love to see. You can't be a teacher and say, today I fancy doing 12 till 4. Nurse going, can't really be asked to do the night shift tonight. I get it. Those things don't work. But for those of us that are fortunate enough to be in industries where you can be flexible, I would love to see more flexibility for everybody.
Yeah.
The brief stint I had at the NHS, which started as a temp job and ended up being 3 years of my life, but it was part-time, and it was flexi time, it was admin stuff. That really worked for me because I'm better at starting earlier, finishing earlier. My brain kind of falls out by about 4 p.m. It just does, always has done. So I would get in at 8, finish by 4, brilliant. Other colleagues wouldn't start till 10, because they were not morning people, and they'd finish at 6. To me, the idea of finishing work at 6 is horrific, because by that point I need to be in my pajamas by then. I'll happily start at 6 in the morning if that means that I can be in my pajamas by 4 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it just makes sense.
And that's just being aware of who you are and how you function. And when you look at the vast majority of the jobs that I've had over the years, there's been many, we know this, the ones I've thrived in have been the ones where there has been flexibility on starting time. And the ones I've struggled with have been the ones where it's expected that you are 9 to 5, that you are rigidly those times. I just don't fit into that box.
Yeah. And we're not going to get into a debate about hybrid working and working from home and whatever, but just looking purely at this for women at this stage, and a lot of women's health issues, also men's health issues, hybrid working is a must, really. Like, if I'm worried that I'm gonna break into a sweat or I'm gonna bleed through my clothes, or
I want to be at home.
Yeah, I want to be at home. Like, just the stress and anxiety of that. And if you can take that bit away, I can still work happily at home, change my clothes when I have to, know that I'm not going to be seen and feel ashamed, which we shouldn't, but of that. So yeah, absolutely. It's just basic human needs and respect.
And I remember during COVID times when the hospital staff were doing frankly, sainthoods need just handing out left, right and centre.
Yeah.
But you were hearing these awful stories that people hadn't even been able to have a sip of water all day because they were in all their PPE and all the rest. And I just think, even at the best of times, you've seen I've taken lots of sips of my water. I freak out if I don't have a glass of water by me. So for me, and this is only for me, and thank the Lord that there are people who thrive in those situations. I don't. And that to me is a really important part of the whole workplace thing, is actually understanding what you need as much as what the employer needs. Because, if I know that showing up for 9 o'clock every day, 5 days a week, absolutely floors me, but showing up at 7:30 one day, 8:30 another day, 7 another day, 9 another day, and 10 another day, some numbers, that I will thrive.
Yeah, what does it
Well,
matter?
then I'll put myself into the situation that works like that,
Yeah. And it's got me thinking about, now I know it worked out for the best, the whole charity role and not getting through probation or whatever. And of course, like, as an organisation, if somebody isn't cutting it, of course you're going to have.
Yeah,
But
of course.
what would you have liked to have seen them do for you at that point?
See, I don't think there's anything they could have done, because I didn't know what was going on.
Okay.
I didn't understand why I was finding it so stressful when it shouldn't have been stressful. And I will admit there was a bit of a struggle, maybe that's not quite the word I want, between me and the manager. I didn't wholly, I like her very much as a human, but I found her quite difficult as a manager. But not to the point that it should have been that damaging. I didn't sleep. Like, I was not sleeping for that 6 months, basically.
Because we know it's going to exacerbate every symptom.
Exactly. And I know now that that's a massive sign of the early stages of perimenopause. Didn't know. Yeah. I lumped everything being the fault, in inverted commas, of the manager, of the job, of everything. It wasn't. Yeah. If I'd had more understanding of what was going on, what was coming, I'd have been able to navigate it much more easily, because I'd have known. But that not knowing means you lash out at everything around you, don't you? And you just go, well, something else must be wrong because I don't understand why why I can't do this. I know I knew I could do the job, and then suddenly I couldn't.
Yeah, yeah. And so it makes the education and awareness of perimenopause even more crucial. And so do you believe it should be taught in schools that with alongside puberty, or what are your thoughts on how we
Now, I remember, teenage me. Teenage me did not give a shit about what. Teenage me believed that everybody over 25 was ancient.
Yeah.
Why would I have cared about menopause? That was something that was going to happen in some totally different life. And yeah, mum was probably going through it. What did I care? I was a self-absorbed teenager. That was my job at that point, was being teenage. And it was all about me because I was being teenage. That's just what teenagers do. By comparison with some, I wasn't that bad, but I was teenage. So on the one hand, I can absolutely understand the argument when people say that it should be taught as part of all of the sort of whatever they now call
bodily changes. I don't know what it's called.
Whatever they now call that topic at school. I don't know. Spot the person who doesn't have kids and has.
I have kids this time. Yeah, whatever.
But so, on the one hand, I think touching on it in that would be useful, but I don't think your average teenager is going to take that on board. What I do think, so there's two things that I would love to see happen. I would like every single teenage girl aged, I'm going to plump for about 15, because by that point, generally, she's had periods for a couple of years. They've sort of settled down. She's starting to get the hang of what this all is. I would want every single girl to start tracking her period, but not just her period. There's this fixation that that to track, it has to be just about the period. It doesn't. It can be about mood, appetite, energy levels, all of those things. I would love to see every teenage girl starting to track, so that by the time she gets into the workplace, by the time she's wanting to have kids, all the rest of it, she knows her body. She knows that she is a different person throughout the month and that's okay. And she can anticipate it coming. And so when she hits that kind of, on an average cycle of 28 days, let's say day 25, 26, when the world is terrible and everything's awful, she's got that backup to know that that's normal and it passes and her period will come soon. Equally, it means she's got something to go to the doctor with if she is having really heavy periods. Equally, when she gets to a point of potentially wanting kids, she's got something to go to the doctor with for them to look at. And by the time things start changing, as she starts going into perimenopause, she knows herself, she knows her body so well that she can spot changes and they don't just hit her around the head like a ton of bricks. And I just think that would be, I'd love to see that happen. I would love to see that happen. I would love to see girls and women owning the fact that over the course of each cycle, we show up slightly differently and that's okay. And that our body changes slightly in that time. Your trousers don't fit the same on day 1 as they do on day 25. They just don't, and that's okay. Because, oh my God, I spent years beating myself up that I was fat because my trousers didn't always fit the same. Well, now I know that's just hormones and that's okay. Whereas, and I've never actually looked into this, but I have been told by a trusted source, men get a shot of testosterone every 15 minutes. So they show up the same. And that's the difficulty. And that's what I was trying to say about women trying to shoehorn into a male world. I'm not trying to make this about, gender equality or any of those things, because that's another entire topic that I'm not going into right now. All I'm saying is hormonally, we are different. We show up differently. And actually, I would love to see that just being normal. Yeah. So, for example, as I understand it, the Lionesses, their training program is done to work in with their cycle.
Yes.
Rightly. Now, obviously, the actual matches, they can't go, oh, well, striker's going to be on day 25, orcs. But they are working as closely as they can with their cycle, with the rhythm, with their bodies, so that they are achieving the best they can. When I was training for Ironman triathlons, everything is male. And so there is no account taken for the fact that actually in a female body, you have a week each month when you need a different sort of exercise. You need a bit of respite. Now, I could go off on many tangents here, but I'm going to rein it in.
Well, love all of that. It's so important. We can't ignore the biology. We can't ignore the role
we just are
play.
different. And I'm going to quickly just touch on the equality thing, because I want everybody to have the same opportunities. I want everybody to have the same access to, and this isn't just about men and women, this is about disabled people, this is about, everybody. I think everybody should have access to the same opportunities, same salary opportunities, the same all the rest of it. But with the caveat that we're all different, and that needs to become part of this equality thing, because, we all know that someone who's in a wheelchair has certain things that make doing certain things harder, but that doesn't mean they can't do them with the appropriate adaptations. And if we were just to sort of look into the fact that, bringing in the fact that male mental health issues are a huge problem, why are we not addressing that? Why aren't we including that in the equality, rather than going, well, you're male, suck it up, buttercup, you'll be fine? No, let's actually take on board the fact that each employee, each person is just an individual. And I'm not talking about massively tailor everything, but actually, whenever you have a good manager, I've been lucky enough to have a few, I've had some really, really bad ones, but whenever you have a good manager, they understand very quickly how you learn.
Yeah, and they flex to help you, and and that's what it is. It's a bit of flex.
It's all it is. It's just very simple empathy, and just going, right, okay, this is what this person needs, that's what that person needs. No one's asking anyone to go right out of their way. But like we were saying earlier, if somebody's struggling with obscenely heavy periods, they don't need to have to sit in a boardroom for 4 hours, because they can't. And that's not because they're weak or anything else,
or incapable. It's because it's a basic fact.
Stuff is happening that needs them to have to go to the loo quite often, and that's not a bad thing, or it's just a thing.
It just is. And to help somebody feel comfortable and confident and supported in that, instead of that it's a weakness. And so I'd love to ask you, what are some of the most surprising or useful things you've learned about perimenopause?
Okay. Surprising. The thing that surprised me right at the start of setting up the hub was quite how many symptoms there are, and that they change as you go through perimenopause. So for a lot of women, anxiety and insomnia are the very early ones, and understandably, they quite often therefore get dismissed as it being, it's anxiety, so they end up down an anxiety pathway or an insomnia pathway, when actually it's hormonal, but it's showing up without necessarily any of the other indicators that it might be hormonal. So that was a big surprise to me, was that, as I said earlier, I thought it was just, some hot flushes and then your period's end.
Yeah.
It's
and if you don't get hot flushes, then how are you ever going to know?
Right. And 25% of women never have a hot flush.
Yeah.
So, and hot flushes are a sign of very low estrogen. So they happen much closer to menopause. So I apologize if I'm massively oversimplifying here, but as we start in perimenopause, our progesterone starts to decline in a pretty linear fashion, whilst our estrogen kind of fluctuates, again in a downward fashion, but it's fluctuating. And a lot of the early symptoms, the issue is actually the lack of support from progesterone against the fluctuating estrogen. So, but that's not widely in the medical community kind of looked at. It's just like, well, you're not having hot flushes, so it can't be menopause. So, well, but there's a whole like 10, 12 year time frame. It isn't just your periods stop and ta-da. Yeah. You know, just as with puberty, it isn't like your periods start and ta-da. No, you're going through puberty for a good 8-10 years. Same happens at the other end of the spectrum, and that makes sense to me. Like, you know, Mother Nature didn't suddenly, when I was 12, go, there's your hormones, on you go, love. And likewise, now she hasn't gone, right, they're gone. I mean, it stands to reason, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just what you were saying there as well, one of the things that came into my head is when I found out, and I don't, like, I'm saying I don't know why I didn't know this, who did, that perimenopause can hit at any point post-puberty. And so if you think you're not being believed at 40, like the horror of dealing with this at 20 is just...
The youngest I know is somebody who was 15 when she had hit menopause.
Oh my
so her periods started, and by the time she was 15, they'd stopped.
Oh, wow.
And okay, it's rare.
Yeah.
And it's if it all sort of finishes before you're 40, then it's premature ovarian insufficiency, POI. So it's the same, but it's slightly different. So you know, insofar as it is still unusual.
Yeah.
But it can happen.
That's the thing, we need to know that these things these things can happen, and employers need to know this can happen.
But also, this is my little maths lesson that I like to do every now and then. So the average age to get to menopause for a white Western woman, let's not even go down the route of why we can't, there isn't enough stats for, anyway, average age, 51. It's an average. That means there are outliers. It doesn't mean that every woman, once she hits 51, ta-da. So, you know, some women are 58 and still having periods. Some women, it's all done by 43. Oh, look, there's an average. It's 51. Lovely. Perimenopause can last 10 to 12 years. So even on those very average women, it's starting late 30s, potentially. And as soon as you start looking at the people who are at the younger end of the average of 51, well, mid-30s is not out of scope at all, completely normal. And the NICE guidelines, so the National Institute for Care and Excellence.
I'm glad you said it, because I could never remember what
on their blurb about menopause, and I never remember it word for word, but it says, because obviously that's the guideline for doctors to follow, isn't it? It says in patients aged 45 and over, menopause should be, I think they use the word diagnosed, which I really don't like, because it's not a diagnosis, it's not an illness, it's a life stage. But anyway, based on symptoms. Now, absolutely, because by 45, when you've got your average age of 51, every single woman is approaching menopause. Unfortunately, that sentence in the NICE guidelines gets interpreted as meaning that if you are under 45, it can't be anything to do with menopause. And nowhere in it does it say that. Nowhere in the NICE guidelines does it say that. It just says, in patients 45 and over, work off symptoms, don't worry about blood tests, broadly. I'm paraphrasing. And that's actually quite damaging for an awful lot of women who are starting to get symptoms younger and are being dismissed as being too young, when there's nothing in the NICE guidelines that suggests that. It merely suggests that when a woman is 45 and over, listen to what she's saying about the symptoms, give her some HRT, jobs are good. If she's younger than that, you might need to have a bit more of a conversation, is the subtext. But it's not how that's interpreted, and that it's harmful all round. And this is not at all a slight on the doctors, because they're in a system that they can't win against. It's the age-old, women are small men and we must fit into the box. And unfortunately, we have these very annoying things called hormones, and they get in the way. And so research can't be done about us because our hormones get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll not even get into how shocking and horrendous it is that we weren't included in any research, even women-only medical research, until, like, I'm exaggerating, but until about 2 years ago.
Until terrifyingly recently.
Yes, yeah.
And I do understand from the point of view of the researchers. I do understand, because it is easier to study men.
Yeah.
And I get it, which means it's cheaper, which means you only need a certain sample size. If you were looking at women, you would need a much bigger sample size, because you'd need a sample of women who are pregnant, women who are menopausal, women who are perimenopausal, women who have given birth, women who have never had kids. It makes your research requirements much wider. So I do understand it. But the study that came out in late 60s, early 70s, studying the effect of declining estrogen on the body, which didn't recruit a single woman.
Yeah. No.
Troubling.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And I do get, from the point of view of the researchers, it's really, really difficult, because women show up differently every single day, as we've said, and men don't. And that makes us much harder to research. I get it. Doesn't make it right, but I understand.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you think is a must know? Like, there'll be loads of people watching this, and like hundreds and thousands end up watching these videos in the lifetime that they sit here. Anything that every person should know about perimenopause that you don't necessarily know or hear, unless you're steeped in it like we are.
Yeah. What would be the thing? There are so many things. It's really difficult to narrow it down to one.
If you put, no, I'm not putting it down to one.
Okay. So the things that I see regularly and interspersed with the things that I've experienced. So anxiety, huge. Fortunately, haven't ever suffered. Eternally grateful for that. But it's huge, and people get sent down the wrong path. Brain fog, poor memory, executive function. I hear so many women saying they thought they had early onset Alzheimer's, and then they realised that it is hormonal.
Yeah, that was me.
Periods change. I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought if they didn't just miraculously stop and just fall off a cliff, which I liked to think would happen, I at least thought they'd get lighter. Not at all. They seem to just want to just keep on coming. I thought they'd get further apart. Personally, haven't done at all. 9 years in.
Right. I have the coil, so I don't know.
Often every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Thanks, body. But, so things like that, I think there is a lot more understanding now than there was 5 years ago when I set this up. And Davina McCall, as you mentioned, her program, she's done a great service to raising awareness, and so have various other people. And I love that we're part of a generation that actually talks about it. But it's those sort of niggly things that none of us necessarily realize. So, I mean, when you take into account the fact that the estrogen is declining ultimately, and progesterone is being a much more sensible thing about how it declines, but we have estrogen receptors everywhere. We've got estrogen receptors in our brain fog, confusion, memory issues. We've got estrogen receptors in our eyes, dry eye. We've got estrogen receptors in our mouth, dry mouth. Estrogen receptors in our vagina, dry vagina. Estrogen receptors in the synovial fluid in our joints, painful joints. Literally, estrogen keeps us lubricated, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And as it declines, that goes. And there's a lot you can do with diet and lifestyle to manage that. There's a lot you can do, and if you want to go down the HRT route, and rather than that can help as well. But I think the first point is understanding quite how important estrogen has been in our bodies, and that whilst we obviously can survive without it, because otherwise there wouldn't be such a thing as postmenopause, things are going to change when it's not there at the levels we've got used to. And we need to each take a decision on what that's going to look like for us, as to whether that's, are we going to look down the holistic routes, the lifestyle routes, or are we going to go down the medical route? And there's no right or wrong whatsoever. Yeah. And just as when I hear about the stuff that gets thrown around about if a woman has a C-section, she's not had a natural birth or whatever, the same seems to hang around in the menopause space as well, of people going, oh, well, I'm doing it all without HRT. Do you know what? I don't care. Are you doing what's right for you?
Yeah.
And is that person doing what's right for her? Because actually, that's all that matters. And we have such a lot of choice. And, little plug on my perimenopause hub, we've got lots and lots of experts, and there's a lot of help. There's people who can help with nutrition, there's people who can help with fitness, there's people who can help with mindset, there's people who can help with ways to manage anxiety, there's people who can help with insomnia, there's people who can help with all of it.
Career.
Indeed, and it doesn't need to, none of us need to fit in a box when it comes to managing our menopause symptoms. But if you are struggling, you don't need to. There is such a lot of help out there. And if you find that you reach a brick wall going down one avenue, there are always other avenues. This is the beauty of it being a life stage that we're going through rather than a medical diagnosis. There are endless avenues as to how you manage it, and it is entirely personal.
Yeah. There's just a couple of things I want to touch on before we wrap up. And one of the things I hear people say is, how come this generation are making such a big fuss about it, that every other woman's just got on with it and got through it before now. So I have an answer to that. I'd love to hear yours. I suspect they're not similar.
So I think it's twofold. I think as a generation, we are experiencing the symptoms more strongly because we live in a more stressful world. Because we're the first generation who have been expected to have it all, not just told we could have it all, but expected to have it all, we therefore have very different stress levels going on in our world than previous generations did. And that's not saying that previous generations didn't, husband and wife didn't both work outside the house. I'm not saying that, but it was the expectation to be all things to all people wasn't there for previous generations. So that's one side of it. Another side of it is we talk. We are a generation who talk. Previous generations didn't. This was not something that was, yeah. And I was interested when I first set the hub up. As I said earlier, my mum had a few hot flushes and then it was all done. Yeah, all right, cheers, mum. My godmother, mum was like, oh, tell Anne what you're doing. And, you guys are the generation where I'm not meant to talk about this. So I told her and she went, oh God, where were you 30 years ago? I needed that. And I've found this from a lot of mum's friends now. When they know what I'm doing, there was one when I went to visit them last year. Sometimes mum and dad live in France, so I don't get to see them very often. I ended up chatting with one of their friends and she was just like, honestly, I wish that what you do existed when I was going through this, and this happened and I had to leave my job because of X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. And after this conversation, I just went, look, can I just give you a hug? This is kind of for 20 years ago, but it's also for now. And she's like, thank you. And it was just, and it just wasn't talked about, and doctors didn't know. And then there was that awful study that made HRT the devil, which I won't go into, but 2002, look it up if you want to. And the care has just been lacking, and it's been just kind of accepted. And I think we're the first generation who just go, nah, not accepting that.
Yeah, and it's exactly what I would say as well. And I'm so glad we talk about it, because I do look back and think of all of the women that have come before us, and just thought, you know, what awful things so many must have gone through, and thought they were going mad, thought they were terrible people, thought that it was only them, and yeah.
Well, and then they were put in an asylum.
Oh, I know, yeah, treated for hysteria, yeah, all like just the things. Oh, so
Yeah.
thank goodness we talk, and we're improving it for the next generations. And I think even if it's mentioned at school, even knowing the word perimenopause, it may bear no relevance for years.
Absolutely. But it's something, the seed is hopefully planted.
There. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't let you go without you telling us about brown bears. Somebody will message me and go, well, what about the brown bears?
So, the brown bears. When I was living in the Alps doing ski seasons, I decided it was a time to leave and to come home and be a grown-up. There's been a theme through my life of thinking I should be a grown-up. Now, totes accepting I'm not one. It's fine. Anyway, equally, thought I should come back to the UK and be a grown-up, but equally knew that my first winter not in the Alps would be difficult. I looked into this. This is an aside, sorry. The number of lumens, so I totally understand why people get seasonal affective disorder. The number of lumens you get in the winter in the UK is something like 500 lumens in the daylight, and it's something like 10,000 in the summer. When you, I mean, I don't know if those are the exact numbers. When you then factor in snow on the ground, which is reflecting it back all the time, the number of lumens is, crazy off the scale. So kind of looking at all that, I'm like, I can't spend my first winter back from the Alps in England. And I'd always wanted to go to Romania because I have no better reason than because. And so I kind of Googled, because Google's your friend, right? And I found this charity that did 3-month stints working in a brown bear sanctuary in Romania.
Oh.
So I applied and off I trotted. So winter 2008, I was there from the start of January until the end of March, and working in a brown bear sanctuary. And whilst I was there at the sanctuary, they had a press conference with I don't know what minister he would have been, but the Minister for Agricultural Affairs, Animal, whatever, something, bringing in animal welfare laws. Romania didn't have animal welfare laws until 2008. So yeah, I saw some pretty horrible things whilst I was working over there, but also some unutterably beautiful things. And every person I met was fabulous. The bear sanctuary was the most beautiful place I've ever been. So tranquil and peaceful. Bears are phenomenal creatures. I mean, they're very big, and I was glad there was a big fence. But you watch them and they play like puppies. Like, they literally will tumble each other like puppies do. They love going in water. They'll pick up an apple on the back of their paw and eat it just so gently. I mean, honestly, they're just phenomenal creatures. And I could talk about it for years. And
that's lovely.
Anyway.
Thank you for sharing that, Emily. The very last thing is, we always talk about the negative, challenging sides of perimenopause, and I'm a great believer in raising profile that there's some good bits as well.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us your view on the good bits.
Well, I mean, we've touched on it. No more shits given.
It's
brilliant. I've got no energy. And actually just understanding that I currently do not have the energy for everything. which
Yeah.
initially in the early days, I was like, oh my God, I could no longer be Superwoman. And now I'm like, I don't have the energy for that.
Yeah.
Therefore, so this means I don't bother pursuing arguments that are actually irrelevant. Does it matter enough to expend energy on? No, actually it doesn't. Um, it's meant I've had to put boundaries in and learn to say no, which is huge. And, you know, 20s and 30s me did not understand what a boundary was. She was just like, yeah, of course I'll do that. Yeah. Oh my God, I'm exhausted. Yeah. And one day, the periods will end. I dream of that day. It'll come. Apparently, that magical world beyond periods, there's unicorns and everything. Apparently, that day will come. But yeah, I think the starting to put yourself first, I think, or
Yeah.
starting to understand that you're important too. Because as women, we give to everybody and we're always, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's just what we've been conditioned to do since we were tiny. We've been conditioned to be quiet and meek and not really take up space and not, you know, and actually take up space. Be loud, be big, have boundaries, say no when it's no. And by the way, anybody who doesn't like saying no, a really good one is let me just check my diary. Gives you a little bit of breathing space, and then you can decide whether your diary is telling you you're free, you're genuinely busy, or you're watching Netflix.
Love it. Oh, thank you so much, Emily. The one I will add, which I think is why the Perimenopause Hub has become such a huge success, is I think it's a time we really crave connection and we do lots about it, whereas we've been putting ourselves last. So I think go connect, join us in the hub, search for that expertise and get help. Like, don't sit with it on your own. Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
there
Emily.
is absolutely help out there, and we want to help you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.